Thanks, everybody. It's great to be here. I'm Glenn Solomon, managing partner at GGV Capital. As Mina mentioned, we do a lot with Heavybit. We're very excited to be involved more and more with Heavybit. I'll give you a little bit of background on GGV. We are a 19-year-old venture capital firm. We invest globally. We are currently investing out of our 7th fund, which is 1.9 billion in size. So we speak with a fair bit of capital and invest across stage in companies. So the lion's share of what we do is start investing in companies at either seed, A, or B. But on occasion, as we did with Kong, we'll invest later in companies and scale with companies whatever round we invest in as they grow. So we have 50 million or more in lots of companies that we started with much smaller investments in. We're very sector focused. I mentioned that we're global, but we don't organize our team across region. Rather, we organize our team across sector. So I've got some of my colleagues here today, Oren in the back, and I spend a lot of our time on the investment team focused on software and software infrastructure. And so we have quite a bit of overlap with the kinds of companies that Heavybit looks at and supports. And also Liza from our team is here. Liza is all things marketing at GGV, and so if you ever have heard of us or hear of us in the future, we have Liza to thank. It's super exciting for me to be here with Agi Marietti. How'd I do on that last name? Pretty
Perfect.
good? Okay.
Now Marriott.
So Agi is founder and CEO of Kong, and I'm going to ask Agi in a second to introduce himself and the company. As was mentioned, I'm going to ask Agi a series of questions and mostly focused on the open source model and going to market within open source today. And then we'll leave some time at the end for questions from you guys. So without further ado, Agi, it'd be great if you could start with a little bit of a brief history on yourself and how Kong came to be, and then we can go from there.
Yep. Hi, everyone. So how many of you have heard of Kong? Wow. See, you need to invest more.
Yes, we want to put the money in if they'll only let us.
So a little bit of story. The company was actually called Mashape, and that was an API marketplace. So think about GitHub, eBay for cloud services. People publish APIs, people consume APIs. And so by building this SaaS marketplace for developers, we ended up with about 20,000 APIs, long tails APIs, and 300,000 developers. And so we were building this internal proxy runtime to manage this complexity, and out there we couldn't find anything. So we built it for ourselves, and we've been running at scale for the 2013, 2015. And there was one big problem, like all the metrics were up in terms of community engagement. There were no business metrics going up that much. And so with one of those board meetings where we're kind of looking at the ceiling, we decided to open source, to look at the asset that we built. And one of those assets was, we thought that Kong, which what eventually became Kong, was a very powerful technology that we built for ourselves. And if we would go and open source it, that would have become we had a good chance to actually become a big business, because out there wasn't an elastic for APIs. Easy to use, open source, start in 5 minutes. And so we really was an experiment out of desperation of a pivot, and then we open source Kong and a lot of other stuff too, but Kong was the one that took off. And within 6 months, Obamacare, Center of Medicare, called and said, hey, we're using this in production, and we got the first 180K check. And from there, okay, we pivoted the whole company, what eventually became Kong Inc. in August of 2017. And so I'm the co-founder and CEO of Kong with Marco Palladino, which is my co-founder and CTO, and we've been sharing this journey together for like almost 10 years now. But the first 7 of those were Mashape API Marketplace, and only the last 3 are really this new software, open core, open source business model. So we really wanted to do this. It didn't necessarily happen as like I said, we had hoped that this would happen, and it did happen.
When you decided to open source, there was a commercial strategy behind that. It sounds like the Obamacare effort maybe clued you into, okay, we can make money on this. But did you have a clear view of how that was going to happen?
Yeah, in the board we had one of our board member is in the board of Elastic, and so he knew that kind of playbook that could have become a big business. Like in those days, 2015 and 16, where you have Docker, which became massive utilization, but not a lot of a business there. So we were saying, which kind of business are we? But we were looking at what we were going to open source, and we were asking the question of, is this a mission critical software? Yes. Is this in the data path? Yes. Eventually, there will be a buyer for this, or there is already an existing legacy market for this, yes, which was the API management market, which it became a $3 billion market. And so all of those were like, yes, yes, yes. And is this not too lightweight that everybody uses it but nobody pay for it, like JavaScript frameworks, right? Or is this too heavyweight, like Hadoop, where you don't get any open source advantage because the software is so heavy and complex to run that you're still running an enterprise classic Salesforce. So it's just right in the middle. And that right in the middle, like Elastic, like Kafka, like HashiCorp, is the right spot for open source. So when we open sourced it, we did something and said, like, this should go. But you never know, right? When the moment that you actually do it, if what your theses are correct. But that was the old thesis, and I think there was some experience then from Elastic of how they were running the business that we thought it would work for us too.
So Agi, like, you know, as you mentioned, like the open core model, obviously at GGV, we were an early investor in HashiCorp, so have seen that model working quite well, and have been excited about trying to find other projects like Kong, and we've done a number of other ones as well. But this is like this whole open core model is pretty young. It's pretty new. Why do you think it's working now? Like, is there something about the modern environment that is more conducive to commercializing open source?
Well, if you look at like 15 years ago, right, it was Red Hat, which the primary model was support, and obviously there were Linux, so like massive adoption, and you monetize this much on support, and a lot of people say, well, there's only space for one Red Hat, and that was been the thesis for a long time. And then there's been this other model, which was more like a dual license as well, and MongoDB did that too in the early days, Cloudera, or where product were features that were given for free depending on the license. And then later on you get to this open core where you're really selling a closed source product on top of an open source flywheel that you use as a free lead gen, like a SaaS free trial basically. You get way less data than a SaaS business, but you get this Trojan horse going pretty much everywhere, and then you can monetize on top. So that open core, I think, well, there's only one company that went public with the open core model, which is Elastic, which is trading very well, but there is a good cohort of new ones that are getting there as well. So we'll see how those goes. But it's definitely an inflection point. I think cloud helps, right? The transition to cloud opening up a big shift in the market. Way more developers than 10 years ago, maybe 30 million, 40 million, compared to before. So the skills, the need, the use case, every company is getting digital. So every company needs software. So all this kind of combined and created a much bigger bucket for the infrastructure. And the way you sell infrastructure today is through either open source or SaaS through APIs, right? AWS. So it's either or, but the closed source box, it's going away as a distribution model.
That seems to be a big opportunity for companies like you guys then, right? Because incumbents cannot really adapt their model to this new way of operating. So in that world, how do you look at incumbents? Do you feel like you've got an edge, and how do you try to attack them as a result?
When you're going to open source something, you probably have an existing market if you want to do a business. And existing market is usually managed by legacy players, and they usually tend to sell to a central IT, right? So it's long cycles. While what I find out with at least in our case, or knowing from other board members that are in the board of Elastic and other companies, we sell on use case. So we sell around central IT. So we kind of coexist in a lot of accounts at the same time. And we enter at a much lower price point as on the use case, right? The buyer is the architect. And there's still such centrality. And eventually, I think we can, we go around and we eat from the centrality. Of the role of centrality, I think, that's a bigger discussion, but I think maybe will disappear. The whole, maybe the CIO role will not be here any longer in a decade, right? But we go on use cases. So it's a different land and expand, right? That's the open source model. It's land and expand. If you are in that mid level, if you are a Hadoop or a heavyweight like Cloudera, no, you actually don't get the advantage of an open source. You still sell centrality, which it's not a great position to be in.
Let's talk a little bit more about Kong specifically. So, you've got the API gateway. but you've got much more than that as well.
Yep.
Talk a little bit about the product line and what comes in open source, and then what you've rolled into commercial.
Yeah, I remember this discussion with my co-founder, and we were looking at Hacker News, and we were looking at Hacker News when I don't know if you know InfluxDB, Influx Data, where they were removing clustering out of open source and put in enterprise because they weren't making any money, and so they did like the desperate move and taking clustering out. And then I remember seeing, that was like 3 years ago probably, but I remember seeing all the comments, and they were all negative, blah, blah, bad, 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 bad. And so we look at each other and say, we can't do this to our community. And no matter what's the business, but we can. So we at that day, we decided to have kind of a TAO, or like what it goes enterprise versus what goes open source. And we got aligned on a simple definition where if it's three things basically. If it's governance and security, goes enterprise. Because the startups or the long tail don't care about governance much, not yet. I mean, we're a startup, we don't care about governance yet. So say this is a feature that only matters to the big one. The open source or the long tail won't care much. And if they need it, then okay, then they're suited to be a customer. The second thing is teams, like teams management. Like you have a lot of teams. It's not just 1 or 2 developers using it, but all of a sudden you have maybe 20, 30, 40, 50. So the teams aspect is also features that we put into enterprise. And then the third thing is like like if you have different data centers on different multi-clouds, those are like complex architecture that startups don't have. So also those goes enterprise. And obviously it's all run by support. So we have kind of these 3 things. And since then, it's been pretty nice because everything that is in those 3 buckets, we put enterprise, everything else we put it open source, and it's been going smoothly as of today. When we're undecided, there is maybe a 10% every year of things that we are undecided where to put it. Then in that case, the CTO can make the call, but on default, we go enterprise first, because then it's easier from there to always open source something, where you say, okay, we give you something more, and we've already done it this year 2 or 3 times. Like caching was an enterprise only, but we released it open source. It's much harder to go, we don't know where to put it, let's put it open source, and then you need to take it out and put enterprise. That's something we decided to never do. And so now when we're undecided, we put it in enterprise, and then after 6-9 months, if the enterprise care or doesn't care, or the community wants it to, then we can always open source it, right? But it's easier to do it that way rather than go from open to enterprise. So that's where we do it usually.
The open source community is very important to Kong. It's big, it's thriving. As you talked about, you have kind of a TAO as to what you'll put in enterprise and what you'll keep in open source. Are you explicit with your community about that? Does your community know kind of, your rules of the road and what you split?
Yeah, so that's just been an internal debate for a year, if we're gonna go public about it, or we use like internal strategy as a competitive. We haven't done yet just because it wasn't a prioritization, but eventually we will probably publish a page where say, what is our philosophy of what goes enterprise and what goes open source. We've never done it yet, but we don't have much problem. I eventually tell the world that this is how we think about where things goes.
Maybe you could spend a minute though on what it's like to have an open source community. How much time do you and your co-founder Marco end up spending on that element of your business? The resources behind building and managing that ecosystem, that open source ecosystem. Tell us what that's like, because it's a totally different part of a business than if you're all commercial.
Well, in open source, in the sense, what you gain in marketing, you lose it in sales, right? And in the marketing umbrella, you can put also the community flywheel in that big thing, right? So it's, if you think it in those optics, then you can think as okay, how we can treat it real, because otherwise it doesn't become a community. It has to be real. But also, Kong users doesn't mean community. I think one of the misconceptions in open source is that, oh, that company has 1 million users on that technology, but it doesn't mean that they have 1 million people as a community. A good example of that can be Nginx, right? 1 billion people use Nginx, but has no community. So this is I think what we realize is users doesn't mean community. So that was the first thing. And so the question then after that is how you can take all these users and turn into fanatics, because that's what it is, right? That they work for you on helping with the roadmap, they do pull requests, so your R&D cost goes down, they helps you on support on forum, answer for you, so the community support goes down, they do word of mouth, so you need to spend less marketing dollars because they talk for you at Place, they do meetups on their own. And so we were learning probably last year all of this, and then how we can put into an operational machine where we empower, we call it evangelists, like the fanatic, and then we turn them from 10 to 100. You really don't need many. Like if you have 1,000, your company, nobody can destroy you, right? So I think we have about 17,000 companies running Kong, and that usage is massive, right? Well, we don't have 17,000 ambassadors in a way, right? We have about 10 or 20 that are really vocal, but there is much more. So the question is how we can turn those into communities and how we can empower them to be really ambassador. Because if you can turn even 1,000 people into ambassador, you basically have 1,000 people screaming the war that that's the technology and they need to follow you. So the business will be. But to do that, you need to be authentic. You need to be real. There can be no gimmicks. It has to be. So it's a very delicate balance.
Yeah.
And the question is how we turn our users into a community. And it's not just about hiring a director of community and do a bunch of meetups. Right? It's more sophisticated, and actually we don't have an answer yet on how we can turn this at scale. We do like one by one. Somebody show up, somebody raise their hand. We put you in the community ambassador program, which we give you some stuff, but we don't know how to turn on a more scalable way all these thousands of users into ambassador. And what is also the definition of ambassador? What criteria? Because every time somebody, hey, I'm gonna join the community program, but if you give them accountability of, oh, okay, then you need to do, 3 meetup a year, you need to talk about Kong 10 times, you need to tweet 5 times, otherwise you get pushed out. Say, no, I don't want to do it, right? So they don't want to get accountability on what to do. And if you don't tell nothing, funny enough, they do it anyhow. But you can't do it. So it's a very tricky question. I think we're every other quarter we think about how we can accelerate this. Now we just go by raise hand. Somebody want to join the community program, we put in the system, and we make you successful. But we haven't figured out how we can accelerate that massive usage into ambassador of the company.
Are most of the ambassadors using as their megaphone social media, or are they more in-person type people?
They are a lot online, a lot of online. And then there's also different ambassadors. There is like the introvert ambassador where doesn't talk to anybody, it push 5 pull requests per month, and he fixed the 5 biggest bugs. Yep. And then there's the other one that is always chatting on the forum or on the chat and doesn't give any R&D value, but it's just taking all this, it's going around, all these people like, and it just is your support person that is just in love with answering the community. He feels part of a movement, I think. And so there's also different kind of, and I think we haven't categorized also who is who. We haven't built that. I think whoever was gonna figure it out, that this thing, it's you build a massive company.
Sounds like there's a new product opportunity there to turn users into community for open source companies.
I think HashiCorp does a great job at that. I mean, just the founders are mega ambassadors on their own, right? So they have followers.
Yes, they spend a lot of time and they care a lot about the community.
And they've done it before it even became a business, so it's really authentic.
Very authentic.
And so I think HashiCorp, probably in terms of that, it's massive. I think they nailed it that point, right? Like if I tweet something, nobody cares. If Mitchell tweets something, boom, 50,000 retweets and 40,000 likes. Yeah. And we can tweet the same thing at the same time, right? So you need to figure out how you do that, right? Yeah. And so there is that. I think it's very powerful.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about running your business with an open source component and a commercial component. Yep. Do you have like the same? Does your product team own both? Do you have separate teams on the product side and on the engineering side, or do you try to consolidate those things together? How do you allocate resources among this?
So the company is about 160 people, but we only have 4 VPs. So finally we found a VP product, which is going to join in September, which is going to help a lot. On the product side, there is we call it Team Core, which is really the API gateway runtime, and that's a pizza team of 7-8 engineers with a tech lead. There's also engineer manager. And then there is the tech lead also acting as a PM. Eventually, someone from there will turn into a PM role. And now, my co-founder and CTO, it's an interim, the PM of the core open source. And that's very hard role to fill, because taking a PM from outside and put it into there, like nobody kind of trusts it or qualifies. So he has to be promoted from within. But if you have 8 top engineers working on the core, on the internal, and nobody of them has interest in being product managers, then you're stuck in this, okay, our co-founder CTO can do it at interim on the side, but it won't scale forever. But that's what we have. And then we have all the enterprise components, which are 6, 7 teams, all pizza teams, with tech leads and engineer managers, and they're built on top of the core. Now we're launching a lot of new products, so the company is becoming multi-product before the end of the year, but historically that's how we've done it, right? So we have like 7 teams building different component enterprise, and then we have the core team, which is 7, 8 engineers with a tech leads. And then we have 2 PMs on the enterprise. One does more the interface, so everything that is a GUI, and another one manages the cloud, which is our new delivery model for enterprise on top of enterprise on-prem. But we're way behind on PM. We should already have probably 5 PM, not 2.
Right.
So that's on our fault because we are behind plan.
But as it relates to the open source versus the commercial, it sounds like you have commercial PMs, but other than that, you have product teams.
Yep.
Okay.
Yes. Yep.
Got it.
I don't know. The VP product might join and shuffle all this and
Well, what do
change
what do you think works best as you scale now that you've been running this model for a while? Do you think you've got it right, or do you see it evolving over time?
Well, the question is how you go from one product company to 2. That's, I think, is the hardest things to do as an organizational perspective. Like from 2 to 3, then you know the model. But we're in this phase where we're going from one product to 2, and that's the hardest jump in every company. And I think that will change a lot how we think. And those products are not released yet to the public. They will be at the Kong Summit, but we're really internally, okay, how this will look like after we have different product, because then you might have different buyers, different economical models. So it might change. I mean, complexity goes at, totally different level.
You touched on this earlier, but and you talked about, okay, you have sort of this Tau, which helps guide decision making about what's going to stay in open source, but what's going to go commercial. But it sounds like you will move features you will deprecate features over time. At least you've done that in the past, from commercial into open source. Have you ever had a situation where you put something in open source that you wish you had kept for commercial? No. And okay, but how about so you've been perfect. Not
yet. Not yet.
I could say that's not the case at some of the other commercial open source companies we've invested in.
Because by default we go enterprise, and then we did a lot. We like 6, 7 times in the last year that we took enterprise features. They get kind of commoditized in the world of proxy and gateways, and so we push it back to the upstream.
And so is there like a committee, or do you listen to the community when you're trying to think about what's going to, what starts in enterprise and now it's time to move to open source, or is it just a decision that you and Marco make?
We look at the markets, right? So the market of data planes, there is a lot of data planes technologies, and say, for example, canary release, right? Canary release, we had enterprise originally, but then we look at canary release is kind of a take it for granted in a gateway, which also does load balancing by default, which also eats into market like F5 delivery controllers. So how we can get more of that market, and canary release is not an enterprise feature. I mean, it's not part of our Tau. So everybody kind of already has it in the data plane of open source, so we're gonna open source it. But to your point, yes, it's me and Mark over coffee, and then somebody else, and say, okay, let's what the market looks like, and I think every quarter we meet to think about what is the state of the art, and if we have to take something enterprise and put it in open source, and sales team screams, like you can see the moment use like something. We have this idea of taking these features and turning open source, and then boom, the Slack goes on till 3 a.m. But you have to. It's always a balance, because if you lose the upstream, then you don't have pipeline, you don't have inbound, you lose your magic, your mojo. And you don't feel it. You feel it like 3 quarters down.
Right.
So you always have to look at ahead, and you have to balance, of course. And then let's go back to governance, teams, super duper high availability features, and those are still strong to pay, and everything else.
Yeah, just echoing what you said before, which I really love, is like in this kind of model. No, that sounds horrible, but in this kind of model, what you gain in marketing, you can lose in sales.
You lose in sales.
So it's that balance and that trade-off.
But technically, you should gain so much in marketing that covers the misses in sales.
Absolutely.
Right. And I think if you look at the last thing when they went public, there is who was JP Morgan? It was Morgan Stanley that gives like a one-pager opinion, and I found fascinating between the advantage. Okay, it was a SaaS subscription business. blah, blah, blah. But between the advantage, they say open source moat. And okay, so the way they interpret that is, okay, this is a subscription business with an open source moat around, which is more powerful than a subscription-only business, like Zendesk, because you also get this open source thing, and that's functional as a moat. So we're gonna value this company more on multiples.
Yep.
And I found that fascinating coming from Wall Street, right?
Yeah.
But you gotta have that moat.
So let's sort of speaking of sales and how sales is going to react in this world.
We have also the regional VP of the West.
Yes.
Right there.
Matt is here to hold you honest. So let's just talk about this go-to-market function. Are you I'm assuming you're getting a lot of inbound leads from open source users. I'm curious, like, what do you do with these leads when they come in? First of all, how do you collect them? Like, is your website built to try to gather those leads? And then, are you sending them all to AEs? Do you send them all to like an SDR team, or do you somehow try to filter? What's state of the art here?
So that's a funny story, because historically, when we open source Kong, we put a landing page called getkong.org, and we put a big button say request demo. Demo what? Like, there was nothing behind the thing. So people could request demo, fill up the form, and then my co-founder and CTO pick up the phone, like a sales engineering. And then sometimes if they ask about pricing, I would join in the call and we'll talk about some crazy price. And within 6 months, we get that Obamacare, and we really shoot price on the phone. And that was an inbound lead, right? They really say, hey, we're going production with this in April because TurboTax, there is the tax season, and we need to have a support, because back then we were only selling support. So at the beginning, it's very simple. You have a request demo button, and you have the founders on the other line.
So instead of request demo, it should have been request Marco?
We had no clue what they're doing. Like, Marco was functioning as a sales engineering, as I was functioning as a sales rep, and those conversations were very funny. They were going all over the places, right? So we have no idea about sales. But we closed like 10 logos like this. In fact, the board say, look at these two guys. So if you put a real sales motion, that can take off. So then we start to have a sales team, and we are the first 3 or 4 reps, and it was the same. Request demo. We find out request demo is the best. If you put contact sales, it's too aggressive. And in other words, so it was request demo, works even better than get a demo. But I mean, we do a lot of A/B testing. But so then we put this, and instead of going to the founders, now we go to the reps, to all of them, and then we will start to slice regionally. You are in Europe, you take Europe. You are in US, you take US. And then we start to have an SE, so Marco stopped being a sales engineer, and my co-founder CTO, and it was working well. And we scaled the business up to 10 million in revenue a year. Like request demo, account reps on the other side, and within 3-5 months they close. Then the business gets more complicated, we are way more reps, so we start to put an SDR team in the middle. And when we put SDR team in the middle, things actually slow it down. And I think we weren't prep on okay, like there's this filter in the middle, and so the SDR were doing more than what they were doing. They were not just doing qualifying and turning those MQL into sell, but they were doing even things they should have done as senior reps. So things kind of drop it. So lately we say, no, you take the thing, you kind of qualify based on criteria, like do you have budget, do you have needs, do you have timing, whatever it is, and then we pass it as soon as we can to an account executive. And what happened there is that, okay, we start to gain back speed, but this is for the request demo, which is our lifeblood. We get about 900 request demo per month, and this is like most of the business get closed. Then we have free trials. It's a new thing, which is small, and those are like cloud, people can try, but they convert less. And then we have like ebooks, white paper, download this, download that. And that's where the SDR has to do a little bit of real work to figure it out. But the request demo, they don't need to really be in this pool of SDR. They can go straight to the AE because basically somebody at the showroom, they want to buy a car, and you're pushing back to somewhere else. So we screwed up, I think, 2-3 months there when we put this SDR function. So bottom line, be very careful when the sales machine grows. When you hire the first kind of SDR, make sure that the rule of engagements are very set, and they're simple and fast, because you can lose like months on deals lost in there, and they don't go to the rep. In fact, the reps start to raise hand and say, hey, we don't get any more inbound. Now, that's another problem, because our reps have been drunk of inbound for a lot of time, and they say, no, actually, you need to do sales for real, and then this is your list of accounts, and go and sell. And then they weren't used to do that. Most of the first generation of our sales team was pretty much taking inbounds and converting, which is a dream. But you can't scale to 100 million, but just getting the apples falling off the trees. You have to do pipeline generation, all of that. So we're having a culture change shift in sales to build on top of, as an overlay on top of the inside sales. But it's tough, because most of these people have been just waiting on the chairs, taking the inbound and close a 180K deal 4 months later. Not much work.
You're verging on another question I wanted to ask, which is, you know, how do you layer in outbound in a model where inbound has been kind of the lifeblood so far? Do you goal marketing on generating leads that sales will accept, or do you rely on your AEs to go build their own pipe? What have you seen work on the outbound front to complement your very
so you must have an outbound motion on top of inbound to scale the company to a different dimension. And the question is how. Historically, what we decided to do was, okay, 50% comes inbound, and the other 50% we're going to figure it out outbound from the SDR team. And that changed in the last 6 months, where we still get the inbound, but the account executive reps is the one that does the outbound. So you have to do outbound. The SDR can help, but you have to do it. And marketing is to grow that marketing qualified leads as fast as it can, like just grow the MQL. That's where it goes, in MQL. And then the SDR care, discover and turn those MQL into a good SQL or a good sale as a sale. But really, the shift is the rep is the one that needs to do pipeline generations. Mm-hmm. And if you get an inbound, we counted +1. Oh, good, lucky day for you. But historically, they were running only on +1, and we found out that, oh, well, that's kind of dry now that we have 20 plus quota carry people. Before you had 3 people carrying the word. Now you're slicing and dicing, and more people are joining. We're going to be 25 before the end of the month, and like the inbound is not helping to feed everybody. So you have to do from day one, PG Monday. Sometimes it's called a pipeline generator every Monday, right? And it's a change that we're doing in the organization as we speak. Bottom line, you can't, unless you are like maybe a Datadog model, where you have credit cards, unlimited. I think you can probably scale it longer like that, or Slack, right? You can scale much longer. Dropbox. But if you had an open source infrastructure company, it's just, you don't scale that level.
Certainly, if you're selling up market, there are less logos, right?
There are less logos. Yeah.
Okay. Do you guys utilize SEs in the sales process? If so, like, what have you found is sort of like the perfect way to use an SE, like the ratio of salespeople to SEs, how do you compensate SEs? Do you put them on commission plans, or how do you goal them and get the most out of that resource?
If you're planning to open core or do an enterprise infrastructure, don't undervalue the SE, because actually it's an SE-driven sales. Because when you do the first meeting with face-to-face with the prospect, the sales engineer is the one that get the trust with the architect, because it's a technical buyer conversation, and he's like, okay, I'm an engineer talking with another engineer. So that's how their relationship is built, and then you do your proof of concept or proof of value for 2-3 months. And that's really managed with the SE relation, and then the account executive come over and like close it and do that and build the champions. But there is that SE magic, because you're selling to a technical buyer. If you're like probably another company, a SaaS company, I don't know, if you're like Anaplan, it doesn't matter much. But if you are infrastructure open source, the SE is really the center of sales, and people start thinking it's just a sidecar to the sales rep. In our case, I think the sales rep is a sidecar to the SE. In fact, our best teams performs the best, the ones that have the best SE on their teams. You can see right away
so
if you're good at it.
Is it typically a 1-to-1 ratio?
No, because we're not a heavyweight like Hadoop. It's still a lightweight technology in some shape or form. So we model a 2.5. Okay, so one SE support 2.5 reps. Reality, we're more 1 to 2 now, and I think that's a good efficiency. If you are 1-to-1, I think you're very heavyweight. And eventually, when you build a 500 sales organization, you have 500 SE, right? So it's very heavyweight.
Yep.
So we are modeling 1 to 2.
And how do you pay them?
And how you comp? So historically, they were attached at 70-30%, 70 base, 30% and variable. And that 30% was attached to the global number as a worldwide sales leader, which now I'm running at interim. So fun times. and then that was okay in the beginning, because we didn't have this territory. SE were playing and helping really everybody in the early days. But once you start to have 10 reps and you start to slice and dice, That model is not fair any longer. So actually, in this second half, we change it to a regional. That 30% depends on your regional numbers, not on the worldwide.
Got it.
Not on the worldwide numbers any longer. But they're happy with 70-30, and they ask for regional number at this point, not to be accountable for a global number that they really don't control anymore. But in the early days, it's good that you do global numbers, because an SC is going to probably support a bunch of other people, and it's not really, the territories are not defined. They're not defined yet.
Yep.
But don't undervalue SC. I think is for this kind of sales is the most important things. Is one of the most important things.
Okay, that's great. That's great feedback. Your deals are also large, so I'm curious, on post sales, how you guys handle renewals.
So actually, we don't have churn per se. It's very sticky product, but we just, because the way the infrastructure works, you put this in place with the 500 APIs, and you can't take it out, right? But in terms of what we built on top post sales, is very lightweight. So there is not a model yet.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't built a model for post sales. We are doing now the account.
So the AEs on the renewal?
No,
or?
now the AE are on the renewal. They weren't. Now on the renewal. But the problem is the majority of our reps are hunters. So they take new logo, open the drawer, put it in, close the drawer, and go somewhere else. And they do this every quarter. And then you go and open that drawer of that rep in the last year and say, wait, you have this logo, and this one, which are, I don't know, Fortune 50, and they're only paying 100K for 3 years in a row? What have you done? Like, you could have built your quota for the next 5 years by just juicing this chew. But it's not their mentality, because you have either or. So we're in this moment where, okay, we're giving back logos to those account reps, but then every week passes by and it's very frustrating because they're not working on them. So we have an account manager, which is too junior to get the Fortune the big companies. So we're in this limbo. Okay, let's set up on a customer success team. That's what everybody does. So we put a customer success teams, and we hire a bunch of TAMs, technical account managers, which actually are in some cases customer success managers. So you're confused. What is CSM and what is TAM? And they get paid, but even if we don't renew, even if we don't expand, so we're now figured out how we comp technical account managers. Do we give them a quota or a product usage metrics? We put them 70-30 like an SE in some form of attainable. Maybe you need to produce some customer success qualified leads every quarter to pass back to the reps. So we're in this limbo where what we're gonna do, because the model is not working how it should be, right?
Yep.
It's all I need. How HashiCorp does.
So today, because their deals are large and they're a multi-product company, AEs are heavily involved in renewals, because again, like accounts are being upsold as well. So renewal is really part of an upsell, cross-sell conversation a lot of the time. I think that, and when you have really large deals, I think just abstracting away from just HashiCorp, what I've seen across companies is the larger the deal, the harder it is to somehow have sales outside the loop of that renewal conversation. Sales needs to be involved typically. Then the question becomes, okay, how do you comp sales for those renewals and keep them very motivated on landing new deals and growing the accounts rather than just getting paid and being happy on just renewal business, which obviously doesn't grow value in the company.
But how you do it, if you build a sales force that is new logo, and then you tell them go and farm, like either hunter or farmer, right? And if you build 100 quota carry people that are all hunting, how you turn them into be farmers?
Well, I find that sales management is all about constraints. Like, you got to place constraints on good salespeople and manage them to success within those boundaries. If you leave the boundaries really wide, then you're kind of making life easy. The tighter you draw the boundaries, the better someone has to be to achieve success. But that's actually a good thing. What I've seen with a lot of very high-performing sales teams is you've got those constraints get tighter every year. So maybe the list, your territory gets smaller, or the number of accounts that you're managing, your named accounts, gets tighter, and you just have to drive more value out of each of the ones you get. And so
you put in the comp new ACV coming from new logo and some new ACV coming from existing?
I'm also a fan of keeping things simple. So I'm all like, you absolutely have to, my experience, you have to compensate on new ACV. You do in models where the deal size are large, you also need to comp salespeople on renewals. but that number needs to be pretty low and should be tied to some milestone. Like if you don't get 85% or 90% renewals, you don't get the 2% that you were going to get. But most of your number is going to be made on new business. But I don't think getting too complex around whether it's the new business is coming from new logos or existing logos is sometimes that can get too complicated. I've seen companies spiff on new logos if they really want to get more growth out of new logos, and that can work.
Yeah.
But it's a balance, and I don't think there's a right answer. I just think that it's an art, and each quarter or year that goes by, you have to kind of adjust to where you are. Last question I had for you before we go to the hot seat is tell us about the Kong Summit. You mentioned it before. What do you try to get out of a summit? You got one coming up. How do you build the org around that, and how do you goal people around the summit? How do you know it's successful?
Yeah, definitely lower the budget would be.
Yeah.
So we did it last year for the first time, and there is and we're asking why we're doing this. So it really comes down. Sales, I think, is a lot about trust, because you're investing in the future. And then the Kong Summit was starting this movement of people, customers, community partners that they can all meet in a place and gain trust from each other. This is the right way to go. And so we did it really for awareness and trust. It's not that at the end of it, we say, hey, how much deals we closed. That happens anyhow, but it's not our KPI. Our KPI is really building this awareness. That was Kong Summit 1. And it's expensive. You have to invest. But you build this thing, this energy that then you carries for the whole year, right? Kong Summit 2, we're more, okay, we have an enterprise track, we have a community track, so we're going to track things a little bit differently. But either way, it's about creating this movement and growing this kind of snowball every year and create the sense of trust, which it should then drive more sales over the years. So it's really about building not an open source community but really building this movement around your technology, and everybody agree, yeah, this is the right things to go. And then when it finish, people go and talks, and we can build, and also we can learn a lot. We learn a lot from the people coming as well, meeting face-to-face, customer partners. So it's a double way, right? So you have to invest. It's quite expensive, but you get a lot on this building this think about building the snowball, right? And it requires a lot of time. So you have to do it when the marketing team and the community teams, it's at least 10 people, because it requires a huge amount of time to organize a world conference. Even if it's our first one was 250 people, but you still have to figure out all the details that comes like Spino, like, oh, the cookies needs to have a gorilla. and so there's all this thousand of these little things that somebody has to take care of it if you want to make a good experience.
Well, joking aside, I think the Kong logo is great, and people do really recognize it.
That's why you invested, yeah.
Absolutely. we're all about the logo. I'm going to put you on the hot seat now. I'm going to ask a question. Just give me the first thing that comes to mind. What's your favorite book that you recommend other founders read?
Now, I change every quarter. Now it's Prime to Perform.
Okay, Prime to Perform.
Yeah, read book. It's an amazing book. It's not one of those popular, famous books, but in terms of leading companies and growing companies, Prime to Perform is pretty astonishing.
Great.
Like it goes from the value of in the past we had the fire keepers, right? When you have a fires, you have people control the fires and make sure that the fires was always on. And now that's what is culture ambassadors inside a company. How you keep a culture where you grow. It goes from there to sales, to people management. So it's a really great book for growing companies.
Awesome. Check it out. What's the best piece of advice you ever got that you like to give to other founders?
We tend to overestimate what we can do short term, and we tend to underestimate what we can do longer term.
Interesting. I like that. So that means there's really, really good things to come for Kong in the future.
Don't give up, basically don't look like the first 3 years or whatever, right?
I hear that as so the plan for next year is sandbagged, and you're going to do better than that. That's what I'm hearing. All right. Last hot seats question for you. Pizza or pasta?
That's okay, that's the hardest question of the night. Well, but it depends, because pizza, there is 20 flavors, and pasta, you have 500 different ways of doing it. It's also fresh pasta or just like Barilla? It changed everything.
Okay.
I think
all
fresh
right.
pasta with seafood would be the
Fresh
one.
pasta with
Yeah.
seafood. Okay, good to know. All right, Augie, that was awesome.
Thank
you
you.
very much.
Yeah.
So we have some time for Q&A if anyone has a question.
For example, there is GitLab. You can consider it, but it's really collaboration. I would consider collaboration. The Slack open source version, Mattermost, right, as well. So it's interesting because I think that's a new trend that we're seeing later, where open source is not eating just infrastructure. It's still the majority of that, but it's starting to eat application levels. It's a new thing, so we'll see how big it will become. But it's a new. GitLab is doing really well. Mattermost is more earlier in the life. There is the key thing is how you're gonna monetize the cloud version. Is there a cloud play for those? I think that's very important, because that's how you're gonna monetize those, is through cloud. While the infrastructure, you still monetize the download and run on your own AWS kind of thing. HashiCorp, Kafka, Elastic, Conch, we do like that. In the application level, probably would be the other way around. Like 99% it's how we can take this and selling you as a SaaS. But then it looks a lot like the closed source version of it. So it's TBD. I think open source is gonna eat more than infrastructure for sure.
Yeah, I think open source is, I would agree
You're an
with
investor.
Augie. Open source is a super powerful model, but I kind of asked the question a little, at least the way I think about it, a little differently. I think about how are you, if you're starting a company, how do you get to market in a very disruptive way? Because if you're going after an application market, it's probably one that exists already. So you're trying to displace an incumbent. Even if it's Greenfield, I think Greenfield is particularly difficult to do open source because at that point, if people don't know they have a need, they don't know the market exists, you've got to figure out how you're going to educate them on it. So if you ask the question, okay, how am I going to disrupt whatever incumbents exist in this market and get to market in an efficient way? That's, I think, where that to me is the starting point. And I think if you're an app, oftentimes the right answer is something like that looks like open source, but might not be open source, because ultimately you got to monetize through cloud distribution, like Augie said. So maybe it's free to try. I was an investor in Zendesk back in the day, and they did a very good job with that. Or maybe it's free to use up until you get to some gates in the product, like Slack, another one of our companies. Those are extremely disruptive models to existing incumbents, very hard to compete with, that are not open source, and where you do have open source companies in both those markets that haven't necessarily slowed those guys down.
Yeah, and I would say, like, in the cohort of who's gonna go public next after Elastic, you still have all the infrastructure. You have like Databricks, HashiCorp, Confluent, right? They're all infrastructure. I think the application, it's a little bit behind here. It's very early. That will come, but the next 5 in line are all infrastructure.
Maybe Datadog would be an example of one that's not open source, but is in the infra space.
Yeah, it's a good question. We were talking about the other month. The thesis is that you don't convince the CTO. You convince the people that are a click below the CTO and report to the CTO, but they are the real influencer. So I think one of the traps that we've done a lot is, the CIO is the decision makers. Instead, no, the CIO is a procurement person that moves papers, but he doesn't really understand technology most of the part in these big companies. When he needs to make a decision, he goes down to the now you see a lot of VP of technology, which will function as a CTO, SVP of technology. The CTO as a thing is growing up into big companies, or chief architects. So those are the ones that can relate to you, and you convince them, becomes champions, and then they will pitch the CTO if they have to, if the price is to a point that the CTO needs to get involved. Usually it's a 7 figures annual deal, but if you're starting in the 100K, it stops at the chief architect, VPs, or directors. Actually, a lot is directors that we've seen. So the key is that you convince the director of technology, or the director of digital, or the chief architects, and you get your 100K and you land, and once you're done, you start to meet the people, and eventually you're gonna do a big deal 3 years down the road. But if you start to, let's go with the $5 million from the CIO of Coca-Cola, it's gonna be a long road of probably 2 years, right? But if you land 100K with the director of digital at Coca-Cola, I think that's a big win, and you start like that. So it was really like convince the one that are under the CTO, or the CTO is easier, but the CIO level, because they trust them anyhow. When they ask something, they are not expert. They ask something, what do you think about this technology? What do you think about that? They're not gonna carry the decision on their own because they actually don't know much about technology. In fact, I found out that a lot of CIO at public companies, they come from a CFO background. So they're really procurement people. They're not, very rarely they are actually what they used to be, hardcore engineers. You find them in the VP. And the new way of selling, I think the VP of technology, of the SVP of technology, they are the one that gonna matter over the next 10 years. They are the one that can write also big checks over time. And the CIO is kind of, it will go probably into different, I think it will evolve.
What about the individual practitioner, like in your case, like the app, I don't know, the developer who's building the app and realize
no money.
No,
Disaster.
but yeah, you're not gonna sell that. But I think the question is like, what's the account strategy?
We did a win and loss analysis last week, and we found out that we not lost, but kind of disappear or sent to nurture. A lot of those that we couldn't pass, the developer. So the developer do the request demo, and the account executive, the SE, they stuck with talking with the developers, the DevOps. It's a dead spiral. It's a totally dead spiral. You need to immediately go to the architect, but if you stuck there, that's where we lost the most, because it's not able to pull it up to some economical power. So he would love to talk with you. He talks about all these massive features that he want to do 5 years ahead, and talks, and can't buy anything. So we got stuck a lot of this. In the win-loss analysis, it was quite of like the one we couldn't upgrade the developer to the architect or something else. That deal went anywhere in the developers, and that's also why JavaScript open source framework, they have so many users, because it's all developers apps, but it's not monetizable. Yep. So you go on GitHub as a VC, and you're like, wow, this project has 50,000 stars. Let's put $30 million in it, and then there's nobody paying for it, right? So is that problem? Like, get out of the developer as soon as you can. Even for us, that is infrastructure. In the case of Kong, we have the engineering org, and then we have office of the CTO. Okay, so my co-founder CTO, we basically give him the concept of labs, at a smaller scale, where he built a bunch of stuff like Kong early days and see what sticks. Forward thinking, so they're not part of the business. Engineering built for the business, for sales. So it's like aggressive R&D, right? So if you take the engineering part, we have about 70% on payroll, excluding PM, on enterprise, and 30% of payroll on people working on the open source core. However, the skill set of those core, it's more like 10x engineers kind of type. So you can't really quantify dollars of dollars. And then we have Octo, which it would be in this bucket too, but it's kind of a sidecar. And what I take is usually have, okay, how many engineers we have? 50. And Octo is usually 10% of that. That's the ratio. And those 5 are keep it that ratio. So if you're going to be 100, that's going to be 10. And those are like really forward-thinking bets that can be total no-go nowhere, or someone can take off in new projects. So it's really a third of open source for the main business and 70% in terms of payroll, but the open source are more like 10x engineers. And then as a sidecars, we have this model. This works for us because my co-founder doesn't want to manage people. So we give this lab, so he's always in the startup mode that he loves, and he ships a bunch of new projects. And that's usually 10% of the total R&D. And it might change, but it looks fine. Like we have a lot of firepower on the open source because we have those 10x engineers. And the rule is also do rotation. I think it was one of your questions. Mm-hmm. Like the rotation is very important. Like you rotate, like there is the top engineer of a core goes to enterprise for a quarter, learn, and then come back the quarter after to open source, and vice versa between all teams. So it pollinate, because they have the very different things of the world, people unified. So and also now we have a Kubernetes team specifically to do stuff on Kubernetes. We have now a cloud team specifically on the delivery model. But you move these people around. The ones that want to do it helps a lot in terms of having a better engineering organizations that is more not like, hey, I'm enterprise, you're open source, kind of like this. It's much better now.
That's fun.